Well, hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn show with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm delighted to be joined yet again by Catherine Blaiklock, and we've been looking at the history of Brexit, the history of the relationship of Nigel Farage, and we left off last time looking at the ownership, the structure of Brexit Party Limited. Now, the Eye notes that Nigel Farage became the majority owner of Brexit Party Limited despite your initial trust arrangement, which was meant to benefit the political party. You've claimed this trust was never properly set up. How did Nigel justify taking control of the company? And do you think this move undermined the party's original mission?
Well, there was a lot of pressure, intense pressure for me to give the other 50% of the shares, and I'd already given 50%. I can't comment on whether it changed things because we don't know what the opposite is, but the Guardian spent a lot of time complaining about the Brexit Party Limited and that it was a limited company. I mean, they spent reams of paper complaining about it. And then the question is, if you've now put in something which is almost the same as I put in 5.5 years ago, why didn't you do that then when you had it? And why have you done it now? Because you've had so much pressure put on you to do it. But what it has meant was that if, for example, they wanted to have different arrangement or different accounts or whatever, they could. I mean, under that. I mean, there's a real problem with electoral parties per se. I think we have an enormous problem with the whole system in terms of money. And I didn't realize this until I looked at the Brexit Party when Financial Times released a paper just before an article just before the last election, headed, and I forgot to send it to you, but it was headed £7 million black hole in the Brexit Party 2019 accounts. And unfortunately, it's behind a paywall. Um, but what it showed was something in the region and of 40%, and you can see what sort of income, I mean, if that was 40% or 36%, 38% was not accounted for. It was in an other. And I find that this is extraordinary. Now, all the political parties have this other. The smaller parties, I saw that the number for the Scottish National Party, and you know the sort of problems they've been having with their accounts. There have been prosecutions on their accounts. They were the only other party with a very, very high percentage in the sort of 35 to 40%. But all the parties, including Labour, Lib Dem, the lot, have these remainders. And obviously, if your income is very large and you have say, a remainder even of 10%, and you have 50 million, then that's £5 million. We're not talking about a few burgers here. And then the question is, well, what is so secretive about this money that you can't display it? And I have made the point that when I run small companies and I have a few missing receipts or a miscellaneous column of £500, that's considered serious. I mean, we would not expect to have a remainder column of more than, say, 1% perhaps or even less of undisclosed spending. I mean, if a company, an ordinary company, has to do this, and I would do my accounts, this is how much was internet, and this was how much phone and paper and stamps and the rest of it, staff. If an ordinary company does that, why, when it's people's donations and it's a political party that is affecting the state of the country, are they not is it not demanded of them that they do it? Except you can have a few donations for, you know, confidential things, perhaps, but it shouldn't be like that. And so the Brexit Party was particularly bad, as was the Scottish National Party.
So, what do you think? I mean, talk about it as you say, a high figure, indicative of the success. What do you think about that 7 million? Where's it from, and what's happened to it?
It's easy. Oh, well, see. the interesting thing is where it comes from is very well documented, extremely well documented. The Electoral Commission makes sure that every donation over £500 is specifically identified. So obviously, I mean, there might be one or two, but who in their right mind would start sort of money laundering a £25 donation or something? It's that these are not the problem. So for the £25 donations, you've got the member's name, and with the other donations over £500, it's all identified. So that part's clear. As far as what they spent it on, well, your answer is as clear as mine. Nobody has a clue.
Yeah, and I always say that sunlight's the best disinfectant, and it is interesting. When it's put to Nigel, what does he say?
Well, I have never put it to him, and I'm not sure that the Financial Times put it to him, but they would never put it to him. It will go to somebody in the Treasury Department or somebody. I mean, I don't know. I can't remember whether the finance, but Private Eye certainly took the trust document and they spoke to the treasurer at that time, who was like Matus or something. I don't know, but he had some shares, and then he claimed the first claim. There were two articles. The first claim said, oh, well, there was something about it, but it wasn't executed. And then the second article refused to comment on it.
So, as I say, there's always a platform here. I mean, you contacted me less than 24 hours ago, and you're on the show already. So we can work on that basis. It's always open. I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to respond to what are very serious accusations. Some of these. Now, reports indicate that you transferred shares to Nigel and Richard Tice, with Nigel later becoming the majority shareholder. You said this was meant to be a non-for-profit trust. What assurance did Nigel give you at the time of the transfer, and how did you feel when he learned he and Tice reportedly used the shares for a £35 placard purchase by the Brexit Party?
Um, well, things had become so difficult, and I felt under so much pressure, and I was so concerned about illegalities, that things were not just not being done right, but they were verging on the illegal, that I had called a barrister in over the Easter weekend at my own expense. That's how bad it had got, to get an opinion. And
And what was that opinion?
well, the opinion was it's a great big mess, and that Nigel had been illegally appointed as a director and all sorts of other things. But this was before the share transfer, and I was put under. I My solicitor was that I had two solicitors who were nothing to do with the Brexit Party now advising me separately. I mean, that's how bad it was. I mean, it's pretty bad. And so I basically stopped communicating and was told to stop communicating whilst, because all any calls that would come would be harassing me to get the shares. And they weren't of any constructive nature. They were simply to put further pressure on me. And this went on for about, well, the real climax of it went on for about 2 weeks. I mean, my solicitor advised me to go to London with a legal team and to refuse to hand over those shares and to lay it out to Nigel what the situation was. But I was under so much emotional pressure and under so much difficulty that eventually they just wore me down.
So you didn't do it.
No, I didn't do that. I just said, yeah, fine. I mean, I didn't say fine. I didn't say fine at all, but they eventually sent somebody down as an intermediary, and I mean, I should have, basically, I signed them under duress. Um, and then they just wiped me out of history at that point.
And how do you feel about that now? Would you have done things differently?
Yes, I would have done things differently, and I also think that I would have made a good MP. I'm very passionate. I don't do it for money. I don't do it for fame. I would have been an MP like Rupert Lowe. I would have asked lots of questions. I would have written lots of replies. I would have done things for my constituents. And I was denied that opportunity, and I was denied the opportunity to be an MEP. And I didn't do any of this for money. I put money into UKIP. I supported UKIP when they were going bankrupt. I helped other candidates and other constituencies pay their deposits. I mean, I gave a lot of money to, and I did all the work for free. So it's not like didn't just get nothing. I got negative, big negative for doing it. But I am over that, and I just think that I will be a political figure, and I will continue. I could just go abroad and just sit in the sun, but then that leaves the problems that we have here for everybody else, and everybody's leaving to go and sit in the sun or go and be a digital nomad or whatever.
Yeah. Going back, Catherine, to the I report. I mean, they are looking at the figures. They quote a figure of 6.4 million in donations, with significant sums from a Thailand-based businessman, Christopher Harborn. You suggested that the party's spending in 2019 was minimal, despite these funds. Can you shed light on how these funds were managed under Nigel's leadership? And do you believe there was a lack of transparency that betrayed the party's supporters?
I've never said that the party spending is minimal. I don't know what the party spending. I've only said that there was a black hole. Well, let's just clarify that, because they had enormous amounts of money, and then they had this black hole, and
Okay.
I don't.
Just to deal with that bit about the claim that it's minimal, because that's clearly come from one of the reports. What were the big expenditures that you saw?
Because once I wasn't in it, I don't know. I mean, I only know the period up to the point where I left.
Right. So what were the big expenditures then, if they weren't minimal?
And anything. I mean, we spent maybe one bus and a serviced office.
Right. So that's minimal.
Minimal at that point, yes.
Yeah. No, and so I think that's where the reports come from. They would look at that and call that minimal.
More. I mean, I took the lease on the offices, which is a service apartment, and then they moved to some bigger ones. And I would have paid for some placards probably, and we would have paid for a campaign bus, and we might have started doing the launch and paid for a venue, but most of the stuff was all free stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's where we talk about it, and it's important to define it. You say rather than bandy words around, you're talking about 6.4, 6.5 million, maybe more. That's obviously significant, but buying buses and everything else would be minimal in comparison to that, wouldn't it?
Buses, or yes, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So the eye, what it does, it highlights that the Brexit Party received approximately 6.5 million between October and December of the election year, much of it from Harborn, as we say, and offered perks like £100 a month club membership. As the founder, did you have any concerns about Nigel and Richard Tice, how they handled these large donations? And do you think the corporate setup gave too much influence to wealthy donors over the party's direction?
Well, I think when I was there was only one large donation.
How
There was
large was it?
100, something like that. 100, maybe 100, 200, something like that. And that was from somebody who supported political causes, including, and I can't divulge it, but include many different parties on the right and many different publications, etc. So well-known name who is around. So nothing particularly unusual in that. Not somebody from Thailand. Once I was out, there wasn't nothing was to do with me anymore. I mean, but the thing is that this guy in Thailand, and they refused to talk about Christopher Harborn. Have you looked into him? But there seems to be that he had two names.
So
Were
what
you
do you know? What do you know about him?
nothing except that I read a report that he had two names. He had another name when he was on some Thailand documents in Thailand, and that he had this enormous donation, and that they won't talk about it, and they walk out whenever there's a discussion about it or ask questions about it. You might know more than I do about it.
Well, again, as I say, we're open to that discussion. Sunlight being the best disinfectant. Everybody's entitled to do what they like with their money as long as it's legal. If he wants to disclose his reasons why and who he is, well, that's up to him. What do you suspect the reasons might be?
I can't comment because anything I comment could be defamatory or litigious. I mean, I can't speculate on what somebody's doing with £6.5 million. I just can't.
I mean, it's such a sizable donation, isn't it? I mean, obviously, you want some sort of influence. You want to make sure party is representing your views. It is a very sizable donation, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, I literally can't throw any light on it. Maybe Ben Habib can throw more light on it.
Okay, well, we can have a look at that sort of side. Now, the eye also mentions, and again, being very careful because there are accusations and allegations, and we're always sort of asking for evidence to support that. But this is what's mentioned by the eye: allegations of what they call Nigel's record of misusing EU funds as an MEP, paying an assistant £35,000 for non-MEP work. Given your experience with Nigel, do you think this pattern of financial behaviour carried over into his management of the Brexit Party's resources? And if so, how did it impact the party's operations?
Okay, so the EU shenanigans were very well known and very well documented, including with, I believe, Laure Ferrari, his current partner, who was involved also with others. And there were numbers as big as 1 million going around at one point. And there were some also very tragic things that happened with Paul Nuttall and Helmer. And Helmer is still supporting Nigel to this day after he was. I mean, I remember being told by other MEPs how concerned these people were because these number were as big as houses, and that people were becoming personally liable for these large amounts of money, all of which stemmed from the same sort of issue, which was employing people who are related to your family, using EU funds to employ people who are supposed to be doing stuff for the EU, but are in fact campaigning for the party. But I've also been told that this is widespread in the EU and that this type of sort of grey areas and semi fraud are very well known, and there's lots of money swishing around. So there were definitely issues in UKIP with money. There were issues with loans. There was issues with Nigel spending money he didn't have, campaign things and whatever. Not necessarily fraud, but just like, ordering 50 campaign cars for £500,000 or something, whether, and not having the money. I mean, spending vast, vast sums of money. And I would say that Nigel has quite expansive tastes, but that's all I can say. And what I can say more about is this very definite feeling, which I really do not like. And of course, I don't know what Nigel thought when he got me, but I'm not his typical female hanger-oner, and I have a backbone, and and it really was, and it still is, in my opinion. I mean, apart from who is, and I'm not sort of, oh, you've got to have some sort of equality, but who is female in the black top of the Reform Party now? I mean, if we took the top 10, 20 names, there's no women whatsoever, none. And I would also argue that there's an inner circle of people, of which Posh George is one, who are part of the drinking club. And that's sort of what I call the gin and tonic club. And they are all, many of them are a lot younger than Nigel, and they are just one drinking club. And I remember even in UKIP when Paul Nuttall was there, and I got absolutely furious because the night before the general election, when he was very near Great Yarmouth and he could have come down and campaigned. He was somewhere else. And then they were all at a bar just drinking. And it's like, well, you're not actually doing anything here. I mean, you could have been doing today all sorts of things. And this drinking culture is not a very serious culture for dealing with very complex cases. And somebody sent me something today, which is that, they don't have a defense policy. They don't have a defense spokesman. That they received an offer from somebody who's like a rear admiral or something in the old Reform Party, and they basically just ignored him and never made him the proper spokesman, etc. So there are so many areas where, and this is what Godfrey Bloom has talked about, that if this is going to be a government, you will not be able to be a drinking club anymore. And I can't see how they will change that culture.
And it's interesting. I mean, you raise that point. I mean, one of the appeals and always touted by journalists is that Nigel's the sort of chap you'd like to have a pint with down the pub. And that's been part of his appeal to the electorate, hasn't it?
Yeah, and that's fine if you want to, have a jolly figure who is, you know, an actor or a film star or a singer, or a comedian who's a jolly man down the pub. But when
But
we are,
the world has quite a few leaders who've been jolly comedians, including Ukraine with Zelensky and his comedy acts. You've got Donald Trump as the ultimate reality star from The Apprentice.
you need to have big, important teams around you. I mean, you look at Donald Trump's teams; he's got very, very big teams of very
And
well.
phenomenal stuff. You talk about the typical female hanger-oner, just for the avoidance of doubt. How would you describe that person?
Well, I mean, again, this stuff is fairly well publicized. I mean, you know, Alex Phillips was had a relationship of some kind and was there's an article in the Daily Mail about how Nigel's wife found Alex Phillips with Nigel. I mean, that's well known, that one, and how she was superimposed on Wales. And then she became number two and Wales at that point refused and kicked up this is UKIP Wales, the most enormous stink about it. They didn't want Alex Phillips. And that they weren't, and then it went to the NEC and there was just massive rows. And the NEC won in this case, and Alex left, and then she became number two, I believe, on the MET. So, she got back what she'd lost at that point. And she's not the only person, but the other person I can't comment on, although but that one is more well known. And then, of
And you
course,
say that you can't comment on the other person. Why is that?
well, I mean, all I know is that this other person has said that Nigel's paid for her flat, but I can't comment because I can't comment on what people say rather than what is proof. Yeah.
Oh, no, it's absolutely. I say we have to back up with evidence. It's very important, give people the right to reply. But you think that story is going to break soon?
Oh, I think that no, because I don't think it's a terribly interesting story, but I think it's sort of out there in the. But there's also, of course, Annabelle Fuller, Trixie, Annabelle. I think her name was. I mean, she had a very long and very publicized relationship. I believe she's a Conservative councillor now, or head of a council or something. And that was a very traumatic thing for her. I know what happened to her, and she was very, very destroyed and upset about it.
So what did happen to her? Because Martin Jay, in his conversation with me, mentioned her. He mentioned that she snogged him in front of Nigel to cause him to be jealous, and he suggested that she was terribly treated later on. What's your understanding?
My understanding that there are even hard-hearted politicians who thought she'd been badly treated, people you wouldn't expect to, and that Nigel had written letters and told her that he loved her and that he was going to marry her, and that this is a very long time gone thing, and then basically just sort of dumped her. I
And
mean,
do you know her well?
I'd never. Oh, I might have met her once, but I don't know her. No.
Right, okay. Well, again, it's important. We'll get to have conversations with her. The invitation's always open to anybody who wants to come on and explain their side, if you like. Because my only mistress, if you like, is the truth, and I think that's the important point to make. Um, it's noted, and let's go back to the Electoral Commission review. It's noted the Electoral Commission reviewed the party's funding system after concerns were raised. You've mentioned speaking with a Commission spokesman about Nigel's leadership. What specific issues did you raise with him, and do you believe Nigel's actions with the party's finances warranted greater scrutiny?
Can you repeat that question again?
Yeah, so specific concerns that you raised with the Commission, and do you believe Nigel's actions with the party's finance warranted greater scrutiny?
Raised issues with the Commission.
Did you raise any? You mentioned speaking with a Commission spokesman about the leadership, or was that just not true? It's reported that you did.
No, no.
Okay.
Only thing I spoke to the Electoral Commission was in the very early stages about whether we could change the company to by share to limited by guarantee and change the number on the Electoral Commission. I had further no, and I was told that wouldn't be a problem. I did not speak to the Electoral Commission after that.
Okay. So those were the conversation. That's probably what they're referring to in the reports.
There was no speaking to, it was all documented by email.
Right. Okay. And did you raise any concerns with them, or is just that aspect?
No.
No specific thing. Okay. Moving on from the finance, I want to sort of talk about the personal and political impact because we've touched on some of this personal things, and clearly you're still very hurt. You felt as though you've been publicly humiliated and betrayed, in the words that you used by Nigel. How has that experience shaped your view of him personally and politically? And would you ever consider working with him again?
No, I would never work with him again. And I I think that he could be a total catastrophe for the country. I think we could have the most shambolic, greed-ridden, fame-ridden, disorganized, badly run, um, bad policies, badly thought out policies, policies made on the hoof, policies that just aren't put together properly. Um, I can't even imagine it.
Okay. Well, looking back then, Catherine, how do you assess Nigel's overall impact on Brexit and the British politics? Did he deliver on the promises you both set out to achieve with the Brexit Party?
Well, I think we should go back further than that. And the question is, Nigel is considered the hero of Brexit, but what about Godfrey Bloom? Could he have been the hero of Brexit? Could Stephen Wolfe have been the hero of Brexit? If you've got one person filling the space, you don't know what the other people would have done. And you don't know whether those other people would have done a better job. And we can look at the period of UKIP as having, and the Brexit Party of having got Brexit, or we could look at it as an abject failure compared to, and I know we've got a difficult system, but not getting a single MP elected during nearly 25 years. The Green Party even managed to get one elected, and they had much less overall support. You can argue that there wasn't the concentration, you can argue all sorts of things. But you can also argue that some of those people who might have done it and become successful in their own areas were cut down, so were never allowed to do it.
And obviously this was your baby initially, if you like, as someone who founded what became Reform UK under Farage's leadership. What do you think of the current direction, and do you believe it can succeed without addressing the issues you've raised about Farage?
I think the issues are policy issues are appalling and unthought out and not what the voters vote, and that it's just becoming another Conservative Party. And it could be a worse Conservative Party because whatever you think about the Conservatives, they have been hundreds of years. They know how committees work. They know they have researchers, they have depth. um, how to create big white papers and things, policy. Um, whether Nigel will succeed will depend on whether the voters see anything that Elon Musk saw, and whether they take what Nigel is doing and what's happening with Rupert Lowe seriously, or they just ignore it, and or whether there's a movement back, and maybe Generic comes in and there's a movement back to the Conservative Party. So we're in a volatile time. We've got a lot of splits on the right, and it's not clear at this point how that will form. But
Okay.
let's put it this way, Nigel is not on 45%. He's on 27% or 26%. 68% of people don't like Nigel. This is a problem. That's a bigger percentage than the Brexiteer percentage.
Mm. And just finally, then to finish for today, talk to me about the spat, if you like, the falling out with Rupert Lowe.
Well, I don't know particularly anything else other than you've read in the newspaper specifically about Rupert Lowe.
Did you know Rupert well?
No, but I knew him. And Nigel didn't want me to know him. So,
Why do you think that was?
because Nigel doesn't want anybody who he's got rid of to have anything to do with the new people, so the silos. It would have been the same if I'd been Stephen Wolfe or Godfrey Bloom or Gerard Batten or anybody else. So Nigel wants 100% loyalty, and Rupert. I decided really to stand in the seat in Great Yarmouth that I had been offered by Nigel, and my friends are in reform, and one of them told Rupert, and Rupert said, "This is bonkers," and so went to Nigel, and Nigel said, instead of saying, I mean, this is again, I would have been conciliatory. It wasn't like I was on the, instead of saying, "Well, why don't you come and have lunch, Catherine? Maybe we can put you in somewhere else." Yeah. Nigel says, "Don't talk to her. You're not having anything to do with her. That's it." Yeah. So there's
Well, there
never.
certainly seem to be those sort of invitations, and Rupert's very publicly talked about. Let's just settle everything over dinner. Finally, then, Catherine, you're about to issue a press release. What's the nub of that press release?
Well, it's talking about some of the things that we have talked about, touched on, and a bit more today.
And what's the explosive revelation?
I'm not going to comment on
Watch this space. Well, we'll get you back once you have released that thing. But for now, Catherine Blaiklock, thank you very much for joining me.
that. Thank you.